A few years ago, when Taliban recaptured Afghanistan, I was saddened by it on behalf of the Afghan people, but there were a lot of triumphal shouts and accolades from Pakistan. And at that time, I had done a live webinar on the ramifications of it for Pakistan, but also for Pakistanis. And I was absolutely of the opinion that this was neither in the best interest of Afghanistan nor in the best interest of Pakistan. And one of the main reasons for me to assert that it wasn't a good thing for Pakistan was because, in my opinion, the Afghan people who were now under the forced leadership of Taliban will understand and internalize this idea that Pakistan somehow enabled the Taliban to recapture Afghanistan, and hence Pakistan became a party to the oppression of the Afghan people. Now, recently, Pakistan and Afghanistan have had a border conflict, and a friend of mine from Pakistan asked me to record something about it. And I'm just going to say a few things here. First of all, please do keep in mind I don't have any concrete information about the background, nor do I claim to have any deeper understanding of the conflict. So what I offer is just my thoughts. So here we go. So let us go over what has happened so far. According to the latest news, both the countries have now signed a peace agreement. But before that, if you look at the Pakistani news networks, especially TV and even internet, what was being offered to us was that the Taliban launched unprovoked attacks on Pakistani posts on the border. Now, those of you who are not familiar with, both sides have established military posts on their own side of the border. For Pakistanis, those posts serve an important function against any infiltration of the Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, from Afghanistan into the Pakistani territories. Now, before the Afghan Taliban attacked Pakistani posts, it was being reported that Pakistan had targeted some Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Pakistani Taliban camps and sites inside Afghanistan. And the Afghan Taliban, of course, saw that as an affront to their national sovereignty, and they maybe in retaliation launched their attacks. So that is the story that is available in public. Now, my comments on it are brief. I think Pakistan has a right to defend itself against any terroristic attacks. But does it have the right to target areas and spaces inside Afghanistan? That's a crucial point for Pakistan to decide. Because when India did that on a speculation or on this assumption that they were hitting terroristic organizations inside Pakistan, we almost went to war. So it's the same kind of logic. Now, I have no sympathy for Taliban, whether they are the Taliban in Afghanistan or Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. I think they are brutal and they have a complete misunderstanding of what Islam, especially modern Islam, ought to be. So I will never be an apologist for them. But I've always kept in mind the honor and dignity of Afghan people, whether they are under Taliban or not. Now, let's look at why Pakistanis were so happy when the Taliban took over Kabul after the Americans left. Part of the reason was that Pakistani leadership as well as the people saw the regime before Taliban, which was propped up by United States, as anti-Pakistan. One of the reasons they saw it as anti-Pakistan was because that government was trying to assert an independent foreign policy, and they had deeper relationships with India. So Pakistan, which has always thought of securing its western border and has always worked towards gaining some form of strategic depth against India, they found that one flank that they had spent so much energy in securing during the Soviet-Afghan War and later had suddenly been exposed because India had a lot of influence there. So obviously, during the fight between Taliban and the US-backed government, whether it's official or not, the Pakistanis were supporting the Taliban. So when Taliban come to power, Pakistanis naturally are happy, their policymakers as well as the people, because they realize that now a pro-Pakistan government will be in place, which is the Taliban government. And at that time on this channel, I had pointed out that that kind of view is misguided, because what it does is it clearly states for the Afghan people that not only that we don't care about you, we have actively supported this group which is now going to come in, suppress your lives, and treat you terribly. In my opinion, that was a terrible foreign policy decision and the long-term policy. So here we are again, the same Taliban who, if not the material, who had the symbolic support of Pakistan in their ouster of the US implanted government, have now turned against Pakistan. And that's something that we need to think about, pause and ponder and understand that when you impose your own people on a foreign territory without any regard for what happens to the people over there, you're first of all making those people hostile to you, but also there are chances that these people who claim to follow the Sharia and everything, but who have no scruples or qualms about killing civilians or any, attacking schools, that you cannot really trust their word. And if you do, you're setting yourself up for more compromises, more failures. Now, the understanding, I think, between the Pakistani government and the Afghan Taliban was that Afghan Taliban will make it impossible for Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Pakistani Taliban, to operate from Afghanistan. And that has not happened. And Pakistani Taliban, of course, are a great threat to the civilian populations of Pakistan. So as a result, I think the Pakistanis decided to send a message and to target the Tehreek-e-Taliban targets inside Afghanistan. Whether they should have done it or not, I am not the best judge of it because I do not have any information. But in terms of foreign policy, in the past few years, after supporting the Taliban, Pakistan has alienated the entire Afghan population, which is not happy with the Taliban, regime. On the other hand, Pakistanis have also started scapegoating the Afghan refugees who live in Pakistan, who have lived there for the past 40 years. Some of them have never visited Afghanistan. Now, those people suddenly have found themselves in a situation where they are being deported back to Afghanistan. So we now have another constituency which will suffer because of the interior policy of Pakistan and suffer in Afghanistan because pretty much the young people who are or will be deported don't know anything about Afghan culture. I think a wiser policy could have been that after thorough vetting, young people and families who are peace-living families and have lived and built lives in Pakistan could have been absorbed within Pakistan as Pakistani citizens and hence not have another set of alienated people who are hurt by Pakistani policy and then have chances of turning against Pakistan even more. So as as a scholar, but also as a former military person, my views on this are kind of complicated, because as a scholar who believes in peace, I would rather that Pakistan worked with Afghan people and reduced any support for Taliban, even when Taliban are pro-Pakistan, which they are not. I think when you keep in mind the interest of the people upon whom you are forcing a new government, you have to keep in mind it might be in your short-term interest, but in the long run, you will have a hostile nation right next to you because of your actions. Now, another reason, and this is maybe slightly far-fetched for Pakistan to fight against Taliban at this juncture, could be very easily that the Taliban are now reaching out to India. And their foreign minister with the delegation was there, and India is now rebuilding relationships with this Taliban government, and maybe Pakistanis didn't want it, or they do not want a strong presence of India in Afghanistan. Now, what we must keep in mind, and especially Pakistanis must keep in mind, is that India had invested heavily in Afghanistan, in infrastructure, in education during the previous government. So if they had any influence there, it wasn't simply because that government was hostile to Pakistan. It was because India had invested a lot of political capital, but a lot of economic capital in Afghanistan as well. In opposition to that, if we look at Pakistan's investment in Afghanistan, other than the border trade, our biggest investment, sadly, has been the Taliban. And before that, of course, the whole Afghan jihad. So overall, I'm glad that both sides have come to their senses and signed a peace agreement. I think it would be absolutely important for the Taliban to realize that they have to control any trans-border activity by the Pakistani Taliban into Pakistani territory. And I think Pakistan has a right to defend itself against that kind of terroristic activity. I think also that Pakistan has a right to go after these terrorists because what they do is terrible and destructive. But I think if they could find a way to talk to the Afghan government before they take any unilateral actions, maybe it would be more effective. And in terms of culture, it would give the Afghan Taliban some kind of face saving. What I absolutely do not agree with and will never support is the Pakistani government negotiating with Pakistani Taliban or Afghan Taliban and giving up on the civic constitution and civic structures that still are there. And maybe they are not strong, but at least we have a system of government and a constitution that doesn't just implement strict and fundamentalist interpretation of the Sharia. We at least have universities, colleges, women professionals, women professors. Yes, granted, their rights are still not equal, but at least we are not what the Taliban have done. So fighting symbolically and ideologically against any such attempts, either by internal religious forces or by the Taliban living in Afghanistan, I think it's crucial for Pakistan. And I think it is also crucial for Pakistan to defend its borders and to defend its people and to go after anyone who threatens Pakistan or its people. I think it can be done in a more subtle way. And maybe this experience will teach both sides, the Afghan Taliban, the idea that they need to control trans-border incursions, and to Pakistanis that they need to coordinate with the Taliban. And most importantly, Pakistanis need to stop looking at Afghanistan as this hostile territory that they need to control and that they need to impose a government like Taliban. I think if Pakistani foreign affairs people and other powerful constituencies, if they realize that Afghan people deserve a better chance at life and that their interest is supreme, especially if Pakistan wants to have a friendly Afghan population, it is important not to aid and abet a group of people who capture Afghanistan and then treat their people so terribly, especially the women. I think that way of looking at Afghanistan as something to be controlled will need to change in the long run if Pakistan wants to have better and positive long-term relationships with the Afghan people. So that's all I have to say on this topic. I know it's not a lot, and as I said earlier, my information is pretty slim. I don't know much about what's happening on the ground, but my opinions are kind of speculated, but also reflective about what has happened and what is likely to happen if things continue as they are, but with a hope that both sides can change the way they think about each other and the way they act towards each other. That's all. Thank you so much. Stay safe and peace and love.